it sounds like you were working on maybe companies and then Bitcoin, and now kind of curious about Nostr stuff, and just curious to hear sort of your journey there.
Yeah, for sure. So I started my career in the healthcare IT world. So I worked on electronic medical record software for about a decade. Cerner is the one that I actually worked for. They're based here in Kansas City where I live. So it was kind of like, everybody after they graduate goes to work at Cerner for 3 years and then goes and does something else, kind of one of those things, which was my journey. So I worked there, learned all about their software, ended up starting my own company, kind of doing some consulting on software for them and others, kind of, working directly with hospitals to roll out new technology, stuff like that. And that kind of dovetailed into creating some of our own software in the same ecosystem. And so ended up building, a decently sized company doing that for about a decade. And then, when I got involved with Bitcoin back in 2016, it was actually one of my software engineer friends that I knew who originally introduced me. I'm not much of a tech guy, even though my background kind of sounds like I am. I was mostly like, the business development type of consulting guy. So, got involved in Bitcoin back then. And like once COVID hit, everything I knew about Bitcoin and everything I had learned about, money printing, all that kind of stuff, like tangential to Bitcoin, I just realized like now is the time for this thing to really do something. Like if it's ever going to take off, this is it. And so I made the decision to jump into the Bitcoin space full time at that point. And so for me, that meant selling the old company, not really knowing what I was going to do at Bitcoin full time, which was kind of crazy looking back on it. But I think a lot of people kind of, end up making changes like that. I've come to realize after the fact. But yeah, so we, me and a couple other guys here in Kansas City started the Kansas City Bitcoin meetup group, which has been super fun to grow over the last couple of years. We meet bi-weekly usually, and we have anywhere between 20 and 50 people show up, which has been super fun, kind of building that out.
And are the people who show up to that, do they already kind of get it, or they're coming curious and this is sort of their first onboarding step to learn about what Bitcoin is, or kind of a mix of things? How does that work?
Yeah, kind of a mix. I would say it's mostly brand new people though. It's kind of like one of those things where somebody who's a little bit familiar with Bitcoin comes one time and then they come back the next time with some friends who maybe are, just starting out their journey, or maybe they're involved in like trading altcoins, or, kind of just maybe not fully orange pilled as we call it, but are interested. And then the hope for us is kind of to try to, provide education to bring them all the way into the Bitcoin only view.
What have you found? Yeah. I'm curious, what have you found, sort of are the hesitations, are the things that seem to be maybe more common given, I don't know, there's probably some, I don't know if it's political, orientation around that area, or there's some sort of like monetary expectation that maybe was missed, or, I almost think there's like a little sociological petri dish in every place. And I wonder if there are things that feel like they seem to be common themes when you meet people who are, new to Bitcoin in Kansas City versus maybe what you see on the internet a lot.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think like Midwesterners in general are usually like pretty, I don't know if distrusting is the right word, but more skeptical, I guess, of like politicians and leadership. We're kind of like we're going to get it done ourselves type of people. So I think those people kind of lend themselves more towards like the libertarian type thinking, and, Bitcoin plugs into that really well. And a lot of people too, post COVID, when they saw like the lockdowns and kind of how, I don't get on too big of a tangent with COVID, but a lot of people had a lot of questions about how things were handled there. And that led people to kind of start investigating other areas that they may not have went down the rabbit hole before. So like the biggest example is all of the, the 60% of the dollars in existence that were printed during the last couple of years over the COVID timeline. People seeing that and maybe not really understanding how that's possible, or why that's a good idea, or kind of what, what potential downstream impacts that would lead to. And then, maybe they heard about Bitcoin tangentially and they're like, oh, I wonder if this could maybe play into these problems that I've seen over here. So I would say that describes a big chunk of people. There's also a smaller chunk of people who just want to make money, right? A lot of people's first, introduction to Bitcoin and crypto is just, try to get rich quick. And then a portion of those people stay around when they finally learn what it seems. So
it seems hard to convert those people. Like if you come with the idea that you want to make money quickly, it almost seems like there are better places to spend your time than Bitcoin. So do people sort of change their mind on that, or they just understand kind of more of a low time preference, kind of longer term view? Do they sort of make more fundamental changes to their own psychology around money?
Yeah, I think it usually takes people getting burned before they really figure that out. So I know this actually happened to me personally. So like the 2017 crypto cycle, like I was in like all kinds of other stuff that wasn't Bitcoin, right? I didn't really understand it fully. I was kind of one of those people who saw the number going up and understood it a little bit. But at the end of the day, like knowing what I know now, back then I didn't understand anything that was actually fundamental to the ecosystem. So I think, once people they live through that like hype cycle, and then they're still kind of tangentially paying attention during the bear markets, and they see like, oh, a lot of this other stuff I used to be interested in either went away completely or is down like 99%, but Bitcoin's still hanging around. Like it's not, it's not dead. It's down less than everything else. I wonder why that is. And so they start to explore, what's different about Bitcoin compared to the other stuff. And so that's something that we try to explain to people too. It's like, everything's flying right now during the bull market, but, just be prepared. It's probably not always going to be that way. This is why we think you should focus more of your attention on Bitcoin specifically.
Yep. Makes sense.
Curious to get your orange pill story. How did you get involved in Bitcoin originally?
There's a guy named Vences Casares. I don't know if you've run across him, but he kind of, I would say, brought the message to Silicon Valley. It didn't feel like there was much you could build on it. And then, in the kind of like when ETH launched, that was kind of a big thing around here, and everybody was buying it, in the pre-sale, and then talking about how, oh, look, you can build all these things on it. And so that was like an attractive idea to me and to the people around me, because we're always like, what can we build? Like Bitcoin, you can't build anything, but ETH, you can, which is obviously not the case, but that's sort of, that's the little sociological petri dish that I live in. And so, it took, I actually used to host a series, kind of like a fireside chat, almost like a podcast, but in person in San Francisco, where we would bring together people who are building something interesting, or like, hedge fund managers or people who are building exchanges or, different parts of the, the technologies around Bitcoin and broader crypto, and just trying to like learn about it and sort of form a view. And kind of through that process, I got a chance to meet kind of everybody that I thought would have some interesting perspective to bring to it. And I went down a bit of an investigation with a very close friend of mine who is also a Midwesterner. And I think sort of like you mentioned, the Midwestern, I'm from Chicago, which, is Midwest, but has a city bent to it. I don't know if a Kansas City person thinks of Chicago as like the big city, but it's still kind of got some of those Midwest values you talk about, kind of the skepticism and that, that's common. And then he's from Iowa, which is, probably even more removed from kind of a big city feel than even Kansas City, kind of out in the farmland. So he and I, both been in California now, multiple decades. And so I think we have a flavor of what this is like here, but then I think we have roots in what that other kind of mentality is like. And we've been good friends for a long time, and we ended up just kind of prosecuting this together, like on chat every day, debating things. Well, what about this? I don't understand that, so we kind of came to the conclusion around the same time that like we had built a lot more conviction. I got over the concern that e-gold is not that interesting because there's other interesting properties to it that make it, part of the way the internet can be improved.
Well, I know you mentioned being like involved with startups for a long time. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Was this like pre-Bitcoin days or post-Bitcoin days or both?
Yeah, so pre-Bitcoin. So I came out to it's a computer science, computer engineering undergrad. And I came out to California by way of Austin. Actually, I was in Austin for a year, but worked on technology startups in Austin, worked on technology startups in kind of the Bay Area, San Francisco. I was fortunate to join Google early on when it was a search engine, and got to meet all kinds of great people and see what hypergrowth at a company looks like.
Okay.
I think I also became a bit more aware from the inside, seeing sort of how ad networks work and sort of what, I think there's a lot of positives to it, but I also got more visibility into that, I think maybe earlier than it was an issue in the broader market. And then, I'm still a big fan of Google, but I thought that Google was really missing the places that people gather online. And so I left Google in 2007 and started what ended up becoming one of the first social gaming companies when Facebook first launched their platform. So we were one of the first companies doing that stuff and playing around with it. I was really excited about places for people to gather online because I think Google's really bad at that. That was kind of my childhood growing up in the 80s and 90s, was playing on BBSs and Prodigy, CompuServe, other kinds of online services, even AOL.
Yep.
So, I think those things, as well as the BBSs, I think those like places to gather were things that Google was not good at. And whenever they tried to do it, they failed. And I was seeing the rise of, Facebook was, I think, a couple years old. I guess it was 2004, 2007 when we started that. So it was about 3 years old. And it was just obvious it was going to, dominate and take over the web in a way. But it felt like it was going to be a way that was sort of like the concerns I had around what I saw at Google were amplified 10x when it's an ad based on sort of attention arbitrage and not based on, keyword intent-based search.
Right.
So these are great businesses, but those are not the kinds of things, like I was sort of, both appreciating the growth and importance of these things, but not something that I wanted to participate in kind of so directly. So I sold that company in 2009, got bought by Walt Disney.
Okay.
And then, I've continued for the last, I guess it's been 13 years or so now, since 2010, to sort of help startups in various ways. And I angel invest in startups and I've started other startups, again, interested in sort of how people gather online. So almost the thread of my career has been mostly that. So that's kind of been what I've done in various company formats and investing formats and helping people. When I first saw Nostr, it was I organized this Discord that a bunch of people interested in kind of learning about new things that can be built on Bitcoin were sort of all gathered. And we were sharing it and talking about it about a year ago, and thought it was interesting, but didn't have a good reference implementation and didn't have enough social consensus to actually be working. But it touches on all the themes that I've basically cared about, throughout my whole professional career. So
yeah.
So when I saw it, my friends are like, "Wow, you've really gone deep on this stuff." And it's in a sense, it's what I would say is the next evolution of the kinds of stuff that I've cared about for a long time. So it's just like an actual instantiation of it. And I think a side effect of, I think Nostr is, I think communication in general is a powerful way for the internet, to sort of show us the evolution of the internet is communication tools. I think money tools are, just inherently going to be slower to change. That's a good thing for the money tools. But I think when you have something like a money tool is slow to change, it's hard to experiment as quickly and you don't have as much energy around it. Whereas communication tool is very easy to experiment very quickly, and especially an open communication tool like a protocol like Nostr and some of the early quality clients like Damus. So I'm sort of, I'd say I think what we've seen so far from Nostr and Damus in particular, I think are a great example of how a very, very new architecture for gathering and communication on the internet is going to work. And so that has me leaning in and figuring out how can I help or contribute in some way. And one thing I love doing is talking to people and meeting people interested in it. So I figured maybe I'll just start doing videos and kind of try to do some education, sort of. I'm not an expert at any of it, but I've learned some stuff as I've gone along. So if I can at least help the people who are kind of me from last week, me from last month, me from a year ago,
Right.
I'd consider that a win.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah, I can see why kind of everything with your background has come together to really make you interested in, Nostr and some of the other tangential, like, quote unquote, Web 5 protocols that are being developed now. That's cool. Yeah, I've been doing some angel investing myself as well over the past decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like, it really kicked into a high gear when I got super interested in Bitcoin. So now I spend most of my angel investing time and capital dedicated to Bitcoin ecosystem startups.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I, about a year ago as well, first got wind of Nostr and then, some of the other things like Blue Sky and slash tags and some of the other stuff that I would consider Web 5, I really wanted to start diving in deep to figure out, like, is the infrastructure behind these protocols inherently going to lead to some of the same centralization issues we've seen with other social media platforms, or is there truly something different here that can scale, right? Like, to me, a lot of the peer-to-peer stuff has always been interesting, but it's always had some kind of limitation as far as scaling goes.
Yep.
And so I've started, over the last 6 months or so specifically trying to do as much of a deep dive as I can on all this stuff, which has been difficult. I think I was gonna say, I think you posted, like, there's not a lot of information available about some of the other Web 5 stuff. And I was like, yeah, man, that's been my problem. So,
yeah. Have you joined the Discord?
I'm in a bunch of Telegram groups, not so much on Discord yet, but are there some good groups I should join there?
Well, no, I mean, I was going to express my frustration that I can't figure out where's a good place to engage and learn. So I'm very open to learning about what everybody's hypotheses are here, what things are being built. But everything I can see about the Web 5, brand thing seems to be a bunch of claims about what they hope could happen, but not a lot of reference implementations around how it will happen. And so I would like to hear all the best thinking, and I'd like to read all the best thinking and, kind of have it distilled in a way that, that I can kind of engage with. And I haven't found a good place to do that. So I was hoping I think you were mentioning in the DMs that you've done a bunch of exploration on Web 5. I wonder if if you can kind of set up a little bit of, like, what it is or what you've seen that you find interesting there.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, it's mostly been, either conversations with people that are building some of these protocols, or, some of the GitHub stuff that's actually published on the various websites. But everything outside of Nostr, I would say, is few and far between as far as, like, actionable details go, which has been slightly frustrating, I think. So for me, I think it's going to come down to the DID format, so the decentralized identifiers, right?
Right. And
whether that's going to be the public-private key pair that Nostr is using, or whether that's going to be like the Web3C protocol DID format that folks like, the block are starting to try to build out. And so I don't know enough on the technical side to really figure out why one would necessarily be better than the other. I guess the kind of where I'm landing on that is I feel like probably having that standardized Web3C format might lend to more interoperability between protocols. And the other problem too, I think, with the public-private key pair is, like, are people ready to be able to use that responsibly, right? Store their private key in a way that they're not gonna accidentally expose it somewhere or lose it or things like that. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that part specifically?
Yeah, specifically on the public-private key pairs.
Yeah.
I do. I think that if you sort of rewind what did the internet look like in the 80s and 90s? It was really hard for newcomers to the internet to understand what an email address was. And it's like this weird string of characters, and people would use them the way they might use, like, if you heard it's a mailbox, then you might, if you're married, maybe you have a mailbox with your wife and you share the same one. And, like, those kinds of habits sort of skeuomorphically were adopted by people when they're new to email. Email was a weird thing, and passwords were weird things. Why do I need a password for this website? Was like kind of a reasonable question. Now today, almost everybody, like, for example, my mom is not super technical, but she has a password manager. She knows how to manage her passwords. She's not technical in any way. I wouldn't describe her as, and I think she would describe herself as not very technical, but she's really good at using a password manager. And so, that wasn't the case 30 years ago, but that is the case today. So I think these things do evolve, and people, ideally the technology can be made so simple that it just integrates into your life and you don't even worry about it. It's just invisible. But I think when, something as important as managing identities and public-private key pairs, I think are worth getting the ability to give that to people, and then possibly wrapping that ability with other services that make it more familiar. So like, I would like to see, I don't know if it's the right time today, but it would not surprise me if somebody should just build like something like an auth system to let me use an email address and a password and make it recoverable. And I know like anybody in security says like, that's a horrible idea. You don't know what you're talking about. So I get it. Like, it's a bad idea, except that it actually may help people onboard. And if the service is built with certain integrity and kind of the philosophical idea that people should be able to graduate to owning their key pairs, then I would say that's like a good thing. So maybe today I don't understand key pairs. Give me an email address and password. But tomorrow or next week, or when I get in the middle of some sort of a political spat, I can learn a little bit more and now export those key pairs. And Facebook's never going to let you export, and Twitter's never going to let you export. Right. I think the structure allows for having voice and having exit. And I think that's what's important. It's not that we have to push the frontier of cryptographic key management and education to everybody right away. I think we can take baby steps and an easy glide path to help people get onboarded and get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes sense. I think that's kind of what we've seen, in the whole self-custody model in the Bitcoin ecosystem as well, right? Like generally people start out on a centralized exchange, and then, maybe they move to some form of collaborative custody, and once they're ready, take control of their private keys. Yep. But on the other hand, that has been a pretty slow and arduous slog, I would say. Yeah. Most people are still, just trusting their custodian with their money. So I think it would take some really good UI, UX to abstract that away. And even then, right, like you're still trusting, I think you would still be trusting whatever company or service kind of made that abstraction possible with your private information. Yep. Which people, like you said, people may not think it's important now. I think eventually that might come back to bite people if this really does become important enough to need to own that data, right? Yep. So it's kind of like a chicken and the egg problem.
Right. Yeah, I'm still, though, a fan of, like, don't force people to do really weird things early. Let people dabble while the stakes are very low. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, if you're going to buy some Bitcoin and it's, a penny per coin on some exchange, go ahead and buy a dozen of them and lose your keys and it's fine. No big deal, right? Yeah. And then but then when it starts to get like, oh, wow, I've held this now for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And now it really matters. This is like maybe a substantial portion of somebody's net worth. Then, then you're going to be more curious. You're going to need to be more rigorous about your processes. I think that's fine to just graduate up. I don't think you need to hit everybody with all of the, the best self-custody solutions on day one and be like, Bitcoin's not for you if you don't want to adopt all these things today. Like, so I think similarly, like, it's fine. I don't know if you heard our live stream with Max. He already got his private key pwned.
I just seen it, yeah.
Because he was pasting into some website, and I still like make fun of him on a little private signal. But yeah, I think it's nice that we can just have a beautiful UX and try something out. And if we shoot ourselves in the foot, no big deal. Start over. Like, part of that experience, if you sort of wait until everything's perfect before you're willing to play, I think you get left behind in a sense. So I'd rather help people play, and if you can give people some guardrails that help them play with some amount of safety, kind of like bowling with those little
the bumpers,
the bumpers, right? Help people bowl with the bumpers first, and then be like, okay, now that you know what you're doing, we're going to take the bumpers away.
Right. Yep. I agree. That makes sense. That's cool. One of the other like Nostr specific questions I was hoping to get your take on is I've been trying to understand kind of how, 5 years from now or 10 years from now or whatever it is, and, everybody is on these decentralized networks. How are they going to be interoperable with each other? And kind of how that shakes out could have some big impacts on, which protocol ends up winning, or if it's just like a small-ish user base that is then kind of spread thin amongst all these competing protocols. It's almost like it's a new version of the protocol wars, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think it's, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And if you look at sort of what happened on the web, that was kind of there was like Internet Explorer, kind of coexisting with kind of Mosaic and Netscape around that same era. That was quite a battle. There were like ActiveX plugins and different versions of JavaScript that would get supported and not supported, and then Sun had Java to try to control it. Those are the same types of things we're discussing around what would a Nostr-like future or something like Nostr, what would it look like when, you've got relays that want to have proprietary features and they want to push their own clients, or vice versa. Clients want to push their own relays and clients want proprietary features, or a cabal of clients. Like we see that, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the experimentation is good, but if you played with the Lightning integration on Damus, I think it's wonderful. I tried to make a video about it yesterday. I kind of failed. I'm going to make one today. But I think that having Lightning available on Damus as kind of a showcase is great. But Lightning is not part of the Nostr protocol, right?
Right.
And I think Snort.social is also doing, I think they have a really nice Lightning integration, and they have even put it into the note layer, at least visually. So it doesn't live with the note, but it's easy to do a tip based on a note that you like.
Yep.
And so that's a data set that today at least lives in Snort, and probably my guess is both Snort and Damus would kind of want to collaborate to figure out how that should work. But I think pushing that into the protocol layer today would be super messy. So I don't know. I'd be curious to hear if you had Jeff's opinion on this, but my guess is keep Nostr and let Bitcoin and Lightning be that thing and keep them separate. But if you, just for simplicity and clarity of purpose, but if you do keep them separate, then you run the risk of having clients, even well-intentioned clients, haphazardly creating extra protocol interactions that become super important to how the network works. And then you're kind of stuck like, should it get integrated? Should it get what to do? And do you end up creating islands or centralization?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what's super interesting to me. From it. My interest really is from the investor's viewpoint when I think about these things.
Yeah.
I mean, from a personal standpoint, of course, I favor decentralization, and I want to be as self-sovereign as possible. Being a pretty hardcore Bitcoiner, that makes sense to me. When I put my investor hat on, though, and I look at these protocols and technologies that are emerging and try to think about, business models that could develop on top of them, or even within the protocols themselves, right? It's like you said, some of these things have me a bit concerned as far as, are decentralized protocols going to be able to position themselves in such a way that at scale can achieve certain business models and, really be ready for the amount of users that would be using those if they are successful. And I'm not sure that I've really found a compelling answer to that yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of these things that you can just get yourself twisted trying to get the right answer. And the only real answer is, it's like a complex adaptive system, and humans playing out the thing is kind of how we're going to see how it works. Not that we should give up and just wait for that to happen, but I think we can't perfectly design it. In a sense, it's a little bit of my concern with some of the Web 5 DID thing is it's all kind of done in an ivory tower, and it doesn't actually have to interact with the real world. It can be done in a very sort of with academic purity. But I think when things actually get used, that becomes oxygen for development and sort of
Yes.
you understand what it may be imperfect, but people are using it and getting enough value out of it, even with its imperfection, that you now at least can guide it in a better way. So it's not to say that like Nostr is the best way or the end all, but like there's a reference implementation and many of them now that are becoming real products that are getting used. And I think that is what drives real innovation as usage. It's kind of the best technology is not necessarily the best technology in an abstract sense. It's really the one that gets used and sort of that gets developed more because it gets used. Totally.
Yep. No, I agree with that for sure. I think you can kind of compare it to the early days of Bitcoin, right? We didn't necessarily, nobody probably foresaw the way that Bitcoin would scale and the way that Bitcoin would bring on, hundreds of millions of users. To me, what's different though, is you also have Bitcoin, the asset, right? That is integral to the protocol. And these protocols don't have that. So I'm like, probably Bitcoin will end up being that asset. And then, what does that look like as far as a flywheel effect is interesting to think about as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would almost say like, I think I tweeted this, I think yesterday at JB55. I was like, hypernosterization will lead to hyperbitcoinization, which is like I think Nostr and the kind of loose federation of kind of users, clients, and relays that none of them have a great way to coordinate with each other. They're sort of, it's sort of a loose affiliation, and they need there's real value, there's real cost to storage and compute and bandwidth. And so there's now this like glaring need. We're like, what if we didn't have Bitcoin? How would we ever solve that?
Exactly.
So I think this is almost like buying coffee in San Francisco is not a good use case of Bitcoin. Like, it's fine, you can do it, but but it's more like a prototype or a demo. But like, how do you help this client make a payment to the 8 relays that it owes some sort of value from on behalf of a user that it collected money from, that nobody has anybody's bank details, and you're not using the Swift network? Like, wow, this is the use case. This is it.
Yep. I agree with you. I think, like, to me, what gets me excited about that area specifically as far as business models go will be like the Lightning service providers that are going to be routing all these payments. I think you'll see it's already starting to happen, but I think you'll see an explosion of like professionalization as far as Lightning service providers go.
Right.
And which is a good thing and could potentially lead to its own set of problems, right? If there's just a handful of large routing nodes on the network, then we get back to the whole centralization issue. So
meaning they could censor transactions if they are the primary routes.
Exactly.
Isn't the structure? I'm not an expert at Lightning or LSPs, but isn't the structure of them that at any given time somebody new could pop up a new route? So it's not dependent on that, just that they happen to have a lot of connectivity and liquidity that would cause people to want to use it. So maybe like low fees and good, connectivity makes them attractive routes, but you could still use alternative routes and you can't really be censored.
That is correct. It's the whole liquidity begets liquidity thing. And if you have like some, I wouldn't say economically irrational, but maybe less fee sensitive large players in the space that are making revenues elsewhere in the ecosystem, and to get liquidity or maybe just routing payments for free, right? Then it kind of disincentivizes other smaller folks to try to be another competitor as far as routing payments goes.
Right.
I mean, sure, we could route our own payments through those guys, but you're not gonna really have incentive to try to make your own large channels and create your own large liquidity if there's like a fee insensitive player in the market.
And is that fee insensitive thing, does that already exist? Or you're hypothesizing that such a thing could exist?
It's kind of starting to exist already.
What is that? I don't know this ecosystem
of the world.
Yeah. So how does that work? So Cash App they've got a business in merchant transaction payments and stuff, or interchange or something, right? So presumably that kind of stuff is what makes them a little less sensitive to capturing fee in running these LSPs. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And they can kind of like dictate the terms of peers that they connect to in the ecosystem as well, just because they route so much traffic through the network. And so you're starting to see some of that pop up already. And I just wonder if things like Nostr and Web5 are going to kind of further that as we move forward here. I'm sure
Where do you
eventually
get
there will be like an equilibrium appear, I think, but the interim, I'm not sure how much it's gonna really.
where do you get
change.
the best view today on like what the network, what the activity in the network looks like in Lightning? Is there anywhere you can go to like a dashboard that shows here's the best routes, here's the best liquidity, here's the where payment, like if I try to send you a Lightning payment right now, can we trace that? And is there sort of observability of the network broadly where that can be traced? Or I know these are probably super noob questions, but I don't really just have a lot of detail on that.
Yeah, so there's a couple like Lightning network stats providers out there that kind of give some of that information. I think the biggest two is Amboss, so amboss.space, I think is their website, and then Lightning Network Plus are a couple. But those really, like as far as like routing the payment through the network, I don't know that they go down to that level of detail, but they do show like the stats for like some of the largest nodes and some of the largest channels, and people can like claim their node, and it kind of gives them a way to like attract additional traffic and things like that. So it's kind of like a explorer type website. Oh, here you go. Yeah.
So this is what I'm looking at. So
Yep.
this is amboss.space. You mentioned find your edge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means, but I can search for something. Is there like I was down here, this big movers. Is that the best place to start? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So you kind of see, who's routing a bunch of the traffic, the channel
capacity increase,
capacities.
So this is saying that Loop is Loop an LSP?
Yes.
And so they have increased by 69 BTC over some time period recently.
Yeah, I think we're on the weekly view right now.
Okay. Right. Yep. Weekly.
Yep. Okay. So click into there. I think it shows you more details about their specific channels and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they have 71 channels. It shows you their biggest and their smallest channel.
I see.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. And so, so this is kind of on a per LSP basis. Is that right?
Right.
Is there anywhere to get kind of a global picture of like everything going on?
No, because channels can also be set up privately, right?
Okay.
Nobody really has visibility into those. So this is like the publicly available channels and nodes.
Right.
But that there's estimates out there that like the real Lightning network could be 4 or 5 times this size, right? With all the private channels.
All right. And this is just the regular Bitcoin mempool, right? This isn't a Lightning specific thing?
I believe that's just, regular Bitcoin.
Okay. All-time capacity. This looks like this is an Amboss specific number.
600. Sure. Was that 600 Bitcoin? Yeah, that must just be. Or is that 6,000?
600. It's like 600 million. Is that right? No.
Sats, maybe?
542 billion.
Okay, that must be sats. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
100 million sats per Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So you're looking at like, around 60 Bitcoin, I think.
Yeah. Cool.
That they're tracking for that metric. But yeah.
While we've got the thing up, can I drop over to, this is my favorite one, is nostr.band. Do you use this one, or do you have a favorite stats website for Nostr?
I don't yet. I've seen some screenshots of this one. It looks cool. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. This is like non-obvious in the UX, but you can go here and tap on these ones and cut out that stat, because that stat kind of like nerfs the other stuff. You can't really see any of the detail on the blue until the red's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But this shows yesterday, and this is done, I think it's in GMT if I recall. So this is probably like, we're half a day done, but we're all, we kind of have most of the US days still to happen. So I think with, I guess we probably have the overnight China usage is what got us probably to, a long way here. But my guess is today, so Feb 2nd ends, my guess is 7 hours from now or something. And so if that's, already pretty close, my guess is today may increase again above yesterday. We had a big bump from Damus hitting the App Store.
And the App Store, yeah. That's crazy.
And we'll see that again. And this is, another kind of view of similar these are daily new users, 41,000 versus 49,000, but we still have, I don't know what it is, 7 hours or something left in the day. So I think that'll exceed.
Yeah, it's taken off. I can't believe I was expecting an increase when the app hit the App Store, but man, that was 5 or 6 fold at least, right? The total number of users just in one day.
Yeah, I was impressed with the impact that it had, because I think I was tweeting about this. Is like, I think this is kind of like when Jack came on and was tweeting about it, so that built some social consensus, and then I think when Snowden came on and was tweeting about it, that built some more social consensus. But then the pent-up demand in the App Store like totally dominates those earlier numbers, which I found kind of impressive.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it might be on the
same.
same.
See like how the active users kind of trends from here, right? Like, is that peak excitement, or is that the beginning of like the next big wave up?
Yeah, I would suspect, and I've been talking about this a little bit, both privately and maybe on one of the live streams, but I would suspect that there's a lot of leaky buckets here from a retention perspective, because people come on, they heard it's awesome, they heard it's the future, so they come on and they're like, test, hello world. I just set up a new account on Damus for one of the videos I'm making. I'm making this I'm going to show how to do Wallet of Satoshi Lightning integration.
Okay,
and
cool.
And so I set up a brand new account. And so if you have an account you've been playing with for a while, you somehow found your way to like follow enough interesting people that now your feed is reasonable, and you probably forgot how bad it is when you show up and you're not connected to anybody.
Right.
But that's the experience everybody's having today.
Yep.
So all these people are showing up and they're like, hello world, test. I don't know. What do we do here? There's no discovery page, which, I understand centralization aspects. And like, I think Damus has done a great job building a great client, but doesn't really have, they're not solving the problem of discovery, and maybe they will, or maybe somebody else will. But and then the other place where you see some discovery happening, like nostr.directory. Have you played with that? They have they have some charge fee you can find it, but you're like copying and pasting pub keys between like the website and the other thing. And,
right.
And I think some of them, like nostr.band, I actually have to talk to Artur about this. Artur's the guy who built this site. But if you go here and you see this, you're like, oh, FOSS, I want to follow. Then you hit that and you're like, please install the getalb.com or another key management extension. And it's just, sorry, I didn't have the screen share, but I was just doing it live on my local. But it's like, that's weird. It's like, now I need to download something else. Like,
right.
How imagine I'm super noob and I just heard about this thing and it's supposed to be the future. And now it's like, well, it's the future, but you also have to download this other extension. You have to do it on your desktop. And if you want to do payments, you have to download this other app. And you're like, oh my God, I'm back on Twitter. Forget this decentralized stuff, right? Now, I think these are all solvable problems. So I don't think these are like existential, but I think it means all of this wave of people came on. I think like almost all of them will turn out. But it'll bring on some base of people who fight their way through like we did, and they get connected to people, and they're having a more reasonable experience. And
yeah, for sure. I think too, it's it'll be interesting to see kind of how the relays scale, right?
Yeah.
I'm interested to see kind of how the paid relays interact with the specific clients.
Yep.
And kind of what types of ecosystems develop between those centralized parties, and how that compares to like the open Nostr that's not part of that. Like, is there going to be any value outside of these like centralized walled gardens that are like the beefy relays and the beefy clients?
Yeah. I don't know. Have you played with? I think Kamari has one that he pushed out. Eden is a paid relay.
I think that's one I saw. Yeah.
I was just tweeting at him for more info about how those, what sort of would be the recommended way for that to be used. Because I think my understanding is if I pay a relay, then they're going to filter spam for me. But if I'm connected to 7 other relays that are not filtering spam, then the net of that is that I get a lot of spam.
Filtering spam through the relays.
Yeah, so if I've got I've got one paid relay that does a really good job of filtering spam, but the like network topology would suggest that I should be connected to maybe 7 other ones, so that one that I'm paying, is only one one destination, but like the people I follow may not be paying. I don't know if it accepts rights from people who aren't paying, and so I have to rely on other relays,
right,
in order to pull that. So I'm a little bit like, I'm not sure, is this a prototype of what a paid relay could look like, and then I should connect to 8 relays and I should be paying all of them to do the spam filtering. But what if a noob account comes on that's actually somebody I know and I want to follow? I need to now connect to a relay that to some other relay that's not filtering spam. So is this just from a discovery perspective, just from a Firehose perspective? Like, I just don't know enough about what the best thinking or the current hypotheses are on how that should work. So
yeah, and I'm super interested to kind of figure that out as well. I think that's like one of the big questions for me about whether this whole ecosystem will be sustainable, because right now there's no cost to introducing spam, right? Anybody can spin up a public-private key pair. There's no limit to how many you can spin up.
Yeah.
And I think probably the way that plays out is that spam prevention will probably be done at the client level to try to filter out before it even necessarily makes its way to the relays.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, then you introduce the problem of determining what's spam, right?
Right.
Or determining what's allowed within the client and what's not.
Right.
And then we're kind of back to square one. So
right. Yep. Have you seen I assume you've seen the proof of work on the pub keys?
Yes, that's cool. Yeah.
And have you seen there's somebody had done a relay where you could only participate in the relay if you'd done like 8 leading zeros on your pub key.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. I don't know what the number was, but some 3 days on a normal CPU. And so then that relay will carry your messages. But that's a pretty high bar compared to, just spinning up a random, throw up a web client, generate a new key pair and start spamming. So that relay won't carry any of that. I think if you do some amount of proof of work, either on the pub key or sending sats directly, is I think another form of proof of work that makes sense. Then you could imagine a relay being really high quality, and you could imagine if that model makes sense, then that model is open source and gets replicated, and lots of credible relays decide to do that. Or there's like the noob relays, and then there's like the legit, the people who've done the homework.
Yep. Then you start thinking about, well, are these money service businesses, right? Are they going to need to be regulated in all the different states and countries and localities that they're operating in?
Right.
But I mean, like you said, I think it's cool. Like the cool part about Nostr is there's just so many smart people that are working to solve these problems and answering these questions. And you don't get that, within a Twitter or a Facebook, which just shows the power of the open protocol.
Right. Yeah, and I think the openness being that it is public domain, and there is no perverse incentive. Like there's no alternative incentive, or like maybe I'm in it for the money, or maybe I'm in it for the technology. It's like, if you're hacking on this on the weekend, it's because you really care about it, want to play with it. There's no alternative, gold pot at the end of the rainbow. Or yeah, I mean, maybe there is, but like, it's not a very near term thing that you're just gonna like run an exit scam on this. So I think
there's no token. Yeah, the token is Bitcoin, right? At this point.
Yeah. And you don't get to issue it, so I think it aligns people to, it filters for people who are actually curious about it, which is like a healthy development ecosystem.
For sure.
Versus some of the other stuff we talked about.
Yep. No, it's super interesting. I think it's going to be like the next couple of months will be pretty instructive on whether this was indeed, another P2P fad, or whether this thing's going to stick around for a while. So
I wonder as you're
continue to follow it. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, as you're, you said you're kind of doing a lot of investing and maybe ramping that up a bit, and so you have sort of an existing portfolio of companies that have already been building on Bitcoin for a while. I wonder, are most of the people who are building those companies like very attuned to the existence of Nostr and kind of rethinking maybe some of the principles of how they're building what they're building, or are people more like curious and prototyping? Is it more like a, all hands on deck, red, code red, everything changes? Or is it like, hey, let's experiment a little bit? Or is it just like, we're this other thing and that's another thing? Like what's sort of the vibe or mentality kind of across the portfolio?
Yeah, I'd say overall, since the user base crosses over so much, a lot of companies have been getting requests from their users to be able to integrate Nostr in some way. Now, whether that's like, logging in with their with their Nostr public private key pair, or whether that's being able to like share follower lists, things like that. Those are kind of the two that I've seen companies in the Bitcoin space like kind of putting other things to the side to work on those integrations. And I think it's just a function of, demand from their user base at this point. But as far as like changing longer term business models, I haven't really encountered anyone who's like maybe viewing Nostr as a competitor. It's more of like an additive solution to what they're already building, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily say competitor, because it's not, the structure is so different that I don't think it necessarily will be like directly competing, but I think if it shifts the ground or shifts the assumptions enough around which these centralized businesses are being built, it may be that, how a centralized business thinks about where they create value should shift too.
Right. Now, yeah, it'll be, interesting to see. I think like, maybe, I guess my first inclination of businesses who may be more apt to like shift their future road model could potentially be some of like the value for value companies that we were kind of chatting about a little bit beforehand. Just because, Nostr could plug into that ecosystem pretty easily, I think.
Yeah. And that might be the opportunity. So I've heard there are a lot, like you mentioned, is it Vita is the live streaming thing?
Yes.
So like you could imagine that there's a, instead of them, I don't know if today they manage all the wallets and stuff like that, but you could imagine that they become sort of a client to Nostr, and, the wallet stuff flows however it flows through whatever clients people are using, but they manage the streaming side, maybe even have arrangements with relays or clients to sort of help surface their content in those experiences in different ways. Like, I don't know, like that kind of stuff is probably, like today, I don't know, I haven't used the service, but my guess is you sort of consume the live stream at vita.com or something.
Yep. And they also do have like a restream service as well. You can like post it out to like Twitter or, Snapchat, things like that.
Right. But if that becomes pretty core to like, to be able to serve that content through, say, Damus, or discover it through Damus and then consume it in some Damus-powered experience where all of the sats in the Lightning wallet that you have connected to Damus can now be used to pay a live streamer. Like, there's just a lot of changes that are happening really quickly around it, and it feels like the kind of thing that it's worth, at least my guess or opinion on this, is that it's worth anybody who's anywhere near this to be paying attention and prototyping at least.
Yes,
and maybe
100%.
Trying to define a little bit of like, what are our core beliefs about where we do create value? Like, what are the non-negotiables? And then what are the things that actually, given this new model, maybe we want to be a little bit more flexible on, because it, we want to sort of work with the tailwinds instead of, fighting gravity in a sense.
Totally. Yeah. No, I agree with you. It'll be fascinating to see kind of how this all plays out.
I was thinking,
I'm sucked in. That's for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of, I guess, streaming and also video more broadly, I've been thinking about this idea. It's like, why does, what would a video service look like in a Nostr-powered ecosystem? And like, I'm making these videos, and I've got a little, I've got a little Lightning, address in my about of YouTube, and a few people flip me sats every once in a while. So, I think YouTube is unlikely to become a Nostr client in the near term, but YouTube has built a lot of infrastructure to make streaming and serving and hosting video content really good. And so I wonder if there's a way to think about creating experiences that are designed for consuming video and discovering video without necessarily hosting video. So you may not get censorship resistance. You have to sort of only serve video that complies with YouTube's standards, but could you build a new data set of discovery around video? And could you do that through pushing messages out to these relays and signing them and helping relays collaborate on new types of collaborative filtering on what I probably want to watch next based on the fact that, we watched a common video or we're down some other rabbit hole, or like new UIs to explore different experiences around how that kind of discovery could work based on more open data sets. Maybe I can download and contribute my history, and you can download and contribute your history. And then you can actually play with these data sets in new ways to create new consumption experience. It doesn't solve censorship resistance, but just like, can you do interesting things with discovery on video while letting YouTube still remain the host?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think the key thing there is like it would be optional, right? As far as like you opt in to that experience as opposed to having all of your data harvested, which has been kind of what we're used to up until now.
Yeah.
And so I think that's pretty cool. Like it's voluntary if you want to give up your data, and as a result of that, maybe you have a better experience as far as videos that are served to you that you might be interested in.
Right. And also like you could still control while contributing, right? Like it doesn't.
Right.
You could do things like, I mean, I haven't fully explored the space. I kind of like, it was like a brainstorm that popped into my mind, a few hours ago. But it's like, you could imagine downloading, contributing your stuff and representing it as you and sharing a link to other people or something like that, right? Or you could imagine just saying like, I'll contribute this data set or this subset. Like I'll show you all of the Bitcoin related videos that I consume, but I'm not going to identify myself as the consumer of it. It's just a click stream of video content that I am willing to contribute to like the world's knowledge about what a reasonable click stream of Bitcoin videos,
Yeah. Right.
And so you don't necessarily have to like volunteer. I'm DK and I watched this sequence of things. You can just be like, a person thought that this after this was worthwhile consuming.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess the social signaling part potentially could be missing, right, in that instance.
Yeah.
But if there's like a large enough aggregation of users that all thought they were interesting and they're not each identified, then maybe that gets over that hurdle too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly if people are willing to contribute identities to those click streams, that can turbocharge the value of that data.
Right.
Like maybe that's, it's a dance. There's a reason to do it and a reason to not do it. And maybe it's safer for people to feel like I'm not giving up so much control if I give up choices I made, but I don't identify them as my choices. That you can identify them as choices that a given human made.
Right. I know like search and discoverability are high on everybody's list as far as like, being interested to see what emerges. I haven't really, I guess I'm not far enough in that specific rabbit hole to know kind of if there's any players in that space yet. Is there anybody working in that area as far as like developing data sets or anything yet?
Yeah, I mean, I would call it like pretty early. I've met a few people who are working on stuff broadly in that space. And I think it's pretty early to be doing like really sophisticated algorithmic stuff. I think sort of maybe the most important things today are just like be a recommended relay for some, important clients so that you see enough interesting flow, or maybe crawl enough interesting things that you can amass a data set that becomes interesting on its own through some algorithmic work you can do. But I think it's pretty raw and early to really have like differentiated value created there, I think. I was, Max and I talked about search, and I think we're both very excited about the search problem, but I think the query coverage and content volume is too low to really matter. And like, I think the discovery side of it, like even just people discovery is really hard today. Like I said, I want like when I come on and create a new account on Damus, I want to have like, here's like 50 accounts you may consider following, or like, oh, you're into, soccer, you should follow these 3. You're into, I don't know, Bitcoin, you should follow these 10, 20 accounts. And even just that simple onboarding thing, I think would help so many more people who are showing up actually get connected to a good experience, actually get value from, kind of a consumption feed, and sort of start to understand and interact with the network in this new way without, it sort of helps onboard people well to a good experience. And I don't think we have any of that today. So I think sort of that people discovery, even just manually curated people discovery, I think is sort of step one of that whole process. The sophisticated algorithmic stuff is, I think, like, I don't know if it's months out or years out, but you can do a lot. You can build Yahoo before you build Google.
Right. Yeah. I think that kind of reminds me of, are you familiar with, I'm just going to paste this website in there, hive.one. So they have kind of become a discoverability client for Twitter. And so kind of any like micro community that you're interested in, you can kind of plug it in there and they give you like a recommended followers list. I assume something like that will eventually come to Nostr. But like you said, we're probably a ways from that happening. Yeah.
So this is explore Twitter communities and relationships of 30 million accounts. So I can enter my Twitter handle and it gives me
kind of like a social graph.
Yeah. I see. Yeah. So these topics are, so if I click into these topics and I get lists of people, yeah. And then recommendations. Yeah, this kind of thing. Like, yeah, I kind of want this for Nostr.
Yeah.
Totally. And I want it integrated into like an onboarding experience.
A client. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think I've heard, maybe Max has mentioned this name to me, or maybe somebody else, but what is, I guess hive.one is, it's not a Bitcoin or a Nostr-centric thing, right? It's kind of a...
Correct. Yeah, it's more of just a data analytics processing type company who it was started by Bitcoiners. I think that's why a lot of Bitcoiners are familiar with it.
I see.
And I think the Bitcoin Twitter community was their first product when they launched.
I see.
So, yeah.
So have you talked to them? Are you involved at all? Do you know kind of where the thing is?
Yeah, I've talked to them. I haven't talked to them since Nostr has come on the radar. It's probably time for a catch-up call there because I'm sure they have their wheels turning.
Yeah. That looks like that looks kind of like the experience that I would imagine. Like it looks like they've already gotten some way with algorithmic stuff because they have kind of a big enough data set in Twitter. But if you sort of took a lot of those philosophies and concepts and applied it to Nostr, I think you could do something really, really special and I think it would help the ecosystem. And it may be that there are independent commercial business opportunities around this too. Mm-hmm. Another one that I was shown was I think nostr.directory. Have you played with that one?
I have. Yeah.
Cool. Have you gone through the whole process? Because I think it needed like an LB extension. I was doing it on mobile or something, so I haven't been through the whole thing. But
yeah, I'm trying to remember. Is that the one where you like verify by tweeting your public key? Yeah.
Well, so you can log in. You can auth with Twitter, and it'll show you like all of the people that you follow on Twitter who have npubs available. Mm-hmm. So it helps you like quickly figure out the people who you might want to follow on Nostr. But then I think it does have also like you can tweet your npub after having OAuth with them, and then they match it up and recommend you to people who follow you. So
got it. I think I just did the first step when I was like trying to find people to follow. I was like, okay, let me see who see which of my people are on this crazy thing.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think like on the whole client relay thing again, do you think a lot of clients will end up running their own relays? I can kind of see like some maybe benefits to doing that.
Yeah. I've been sort of back and forth on this. But it does seem like the client is the first touch point for the user experience.
Right.
And that is often a very strategic position to be in consumer products. And so they get to set a lot of defaults that impact downstream decisions. And you may have the ability to change them, but if the average user just accepts the defaults, then whatever the defaults are going to be the ones that get a lot of usage. And so take a given client that has a lot of usage, could have its own relay, could choose to operate its own relay, depending on how philosophically decentralized they like it. If they get enough usage of a given client, they might actually do, extra protocol, proprietary features between their client and their relay. And some other relays may comply because they want access to the user base, but then they kind of end up in this extra protocol world. And it really is. It's the battle of the web browsers again. And you look at like, where does this end at? Here we are, I'll call it 30 years really into the web browser wars. And, you have Google paying Apple, what is it? I think $11 billion for the search queries to run through Safari.
Right.
To be the preferred provider. Because that that user experience touch point impacts everything downstream. If Apple built a search engine or chose an alternative provider that was good enough, that all that query traffic would just evaporate, and that would hurt Google a lot. So it's a dicey spot when somebody controls a lot of that first user experience, like clients do. They end up having a lot, tremendous influence throughout the ecosystem. And if they're philosophically motivated and structured in a certain way, you might see it get out without. I don't know. It's hard to predict exactly how that's going to play out, but I think it'll be interesting to watch.
For sure. Yeah, there's just so many. I mean, the relays are just so important to the user experience on the application that I think that pull will probably be too much to resist, right? So I can just see, every client is also going to be a relay host and provider, which I think is already the case with Damus. I mean, doesn't JB55 run one of the main relays that is a default connection there? And it's not the only connection by any means, but I guess it's already kind of starting to happen for all those reasons that we kind of touched on.
Yep. It's cool. Good. Well, it's been a lot of fun to get to connect and chat and learn about you and your stuff you're interested in, and share kind of what I'm all about. So let's keep trading notes, and as we're seeing interesting things, we can obviously keep the DMs flowing, and nice to connect.
For sure. Yeah, likewise, DK. I really appreciate the time, and thanks for setting this up. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.